So good morning, this is Mchezaji Axum, and I'm the Director of Urban Ag and Gardening Education at the University of the District of Columbia. So this morning we're going to talk in this workshop, we're going to talk a little bit about something that's kind of close to near and dear to my heart, about compost. I mean, we hear a lot about compost, we talk about compost and people are making compost, but for me compost is a relative term. They're good, bad, and just plain old rotten compost. So we're going to talk this morning about the good, the bad, and the ugly news you need to know about buying compost. So compost is a relative term. You have different types, like one of my favorite movies, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So you have very good compost, you have some bad compost, and you have some very, very, very ugly or terrible compost. And sometimes you can get left, excuse the pun, holding the bag if you buy the wrong compost, so you kind of really don't know what you're looking for. So in this workshop, we're going to talk a little bit about how to really kind of look at compost and determine which ones are good and which ones are beneficial for your garden and help save you some money in the whole process. So first of all, buying compost, homemade compost is the best thing you can use to feed your plants, improve your soil, and recycle yard waste. But it probably seems that there is never enough. Whether you're starting a new garden, fixing your lawn, or working in your community garden. So maybe the obvious answer is to head to your local home garden center, load up the car with bag compost. I've done this many times, and I've had it ordered in truckloads, so I've done this. I understand the process. So the bad news about that is this. If many of the bags were tested that you bought at the garden center, many of them might get a grade of F. But the good news that there are some simple steps that you can use to select a top quality compost product. One of my favorite folks who are really having a good understanding of compost is Dr. Will Britton. He's at the Woods End Research Center in Maine, and they do a lot of testing of compost. And so many years ago, I took a course, and he happened to be there teaching about compost and how to test compost and how to look at compost and kind of, get your way around it and not really get ripped off if you're buying it. So we're going to talk about laboratory testing, some of the things they did, but also we're going to talk a little bit about, at the end of this, we're going to talk about some of the kind of, some home testing that you can do to kind of see that you're getting a good product. So one of the things you want to really try to become a compost connoisseur. So one of the things about just understanding when you buy a bag compost, it has labels on it, tells you, the rates which you should put out there. And so one of the things is, once you open the bag, if the compost is wet and gooey or has an odor, it's pretty good indication that the compost was not created correctly. And so sometimes if it has a strong ammonia smell when you open the bag, especially some of the manure-based compost, that means that the compost material was not fully composted. So even when they opened some of these other bags, several bags even contained shredded wood and bark that was mislabeled as compost. So you can really kind of get turned around in buying compost if you don't really know what you're looking for. So one of the things to do is you really want to become a compost connoisseur is, buying compost is not as simple as looking for the best brand. Sometimes it's very difficult to even get a side-by-side comparison because what happens is that some of the composts are made in specific places from specific materials that are made there, and they're made in different states and places like that, so there'll be different compositions from bag to bag. The quality of commercial compost varies because they are usually made from whatever local waste materials that are available at the time. The contents will differ from batch to batch. For example, some compost might contain manure-based compost that has a lot of sodium in it, and some compost the next time might have a manure-based compost which is low in salts. So that means that unless you proceed, the producer and the monitors each batch carefully, a brand that tested at the top of its class 1 month, if they make it again with different materials, could get an F at the next time it's created. So you really can be kind of, looking out for these things. So to be a compost connoisseur, there's some things you need to really look at. So one of the things is looking at the texture of the compost. Okay, so the texture should be loose and granular, with little or no recognizable wood or bark in it. If the compost is not loose enough for you to spread and work into your soils easily, I would say don't even buy it. The color should always be dark brown or almost black in color. So avoid products that are light in color. They probably contain very little organic matter and too much soil. It's easiest to tell the true color if you let the compost sample dry out and then take a look at it, and you can pretty much tell if there's a lot of organic matter or not enough, or maybe it's just a soil-based product which has a lot of soil and you have paid for compost but you really bought topsoil. So another thing about the compost, and I'll say this quickly, the compost made, I prefer compost if you can to make compost under a covered tarp or some other type of structure which helps you retain a lot of the nutrients, those valuable nutrients that your plants and the soil need. So one of the things happens when you're making compost, sometimes manufacturers make them out in the open, sometimes people make them undercover. And so what happens when the rain comes, certain nutrients just tend to leave out the compost immediately once the rain hits them, and one of those things, important nutrients that really is needed for plant production and soil quality, is calcium. So calcium sometimes is one of the first things to leave. Nitrogen will leave out too. So you get what you get in that process. You get something, get some very good organic matter, but the nutrient level of the compost will be very low because it was just too much water infiltration, too much water got on it. So one of compost's biggest benefits once it's in the soil is that it can hold up to 2.5 times its weight in water. But bagged products, excess moisture makes compost difficult to spread sometimes. So you want to kind of be careful about that. It also means that a lot of compost that is sold in 40-pound bags, and most of them are that you buy, buying a wet product. Many of you have done that, and I've done that too. Just buy compost and just mistakenly just be in a hurry buying it at the local garden center. You pick up a bag. It's a little heavier than other bags, and it's just wet inside, so it's just a difficult thing to do. So if you pick up a wet bag, put it down, get a dry bag, and you can tell the difference in weight. And the dry bags will be easier for you to, easier for you to spread. So, smell, or some people, compost connoisseurs call it the bouquet of compost. So compost should have mature compost should have a nice earthy smell. But sometimes this is not a reliable test for bad compost, at least not the right way. So this is because the plastic bags restrict the oxygen supply to the organisms that release the earth odor. They really can't breathe, so they don't really push out that earthy odor. So sometimes you open the bag, you don't really get to smell it because it was inhibited because of the lack of oxygen. So if you do find a earthy, woodsy kind of odor, you probably definitely have struck black gold, and I would definitely buy that, a mature, and what you've really found is a mature, good quality compost. Most bad composts will probably have a musty or barnyard odor when you first open them, and that's fine. But I would avoid any products that have a strong or unpleasant odor of like methane or maybe like sewer gas or something like that, because the odor is indicative of immature compost that might also damage your plants. If you don't want to smell it, don't buy it. You don't want to put it in your garden. So many stores may not even let you inspect the bags before you buy it. And sometimes you just have to end up taking it to the landfill. What I used to do in some cases, when I used to buy compost on a large scale from some of the large producers of compost, I was able to go there and look at and take a sample, take it back home and do some kind of work on the sample and kind of give it a little audit. But also, sometimes I was lucky enough to find a reliable compost manufacturer who would give you a kind of analysis of the compost. Would give you a breakdown of nitrogen, phosphorus, sometimes potassium, and other minerals. And that was, for me, worked out the best. And I think some of the larger compost manufacturers still do that, but you know, it's a good idea to do that if you can, because there's so many products out on the market. I mean, it's bewildering the amount of compost products that are out on the market now, and some of them are just plain not worth the money. So until the industry cleans up its act, you know, what you can do, and I would start to do it this year, is just start making my own compost and make it, you know, in a special way, and just be careful and just be conscious of, you know, all the additives and things I add to it. So, you know, one of the things is, you know, I've always had this question come up, and people would ask me, you know, I'm making a garden. I have beds. I have some 4-foot by 8-foot beds, and they're 10 inches high, and I want to do compost. You know, how much compost, you know, do I really need? So this is kind of a little indication, especially if you're buying bag compost, you know, and what you can do. So, and sometimes, you know, I can be honest with you, I've grown in strictly compost. There was a product called Leaf Grow when I was farming a couple years back that I was lucky enough to live near the manufacturing place in PG County where they made this product, and it was easy for me to get, and I bought it over by truckloads, and some of the greenhouses I planted directly into the Leaf Grow. And it was a very good product. It was a very good product. It contained, you know, very little soil, but it was mostly compost, and my plants did excellent. They did very well, and they, you know, and it was a good experience. But I wouldn't say that that's always going to be the experience. Sometimes you get lucky. So if you open up, you know, just a bag. We talk about bag compost now. So one bag contains about 1 cubic foot, or about 7.5 gallons of compost. So 1 cubic foot covers about 24 square feet when applied a ½ inch deep. 27 cubic feet equals 1 cubic yard. 1 cubic yard covers about 650 square feet when applied a ½ inch deep. So these are some kind of things you can look at. And this is kind of like if you have a garden and it's probably, even if you have a raised bed garden, if you want to amend it with some compost, you know, and it's already structured and built, if you want to amend it, this is kind of the thing that you want to look at it. This, you know, you can add it, and this way it kind of stretches it and goes quite a long ways in amending all of your beds. So homemade versus store-bought. I've had both. I can tell you, I've had both, and I've had some very good store-bought compost. I've made some very good home compost. But the thing I kind of like about the home compost when making it, you can kind of tweak it. I mean, you can add maybe some alfalfa meal, which might add nitrogen to the compost. You can add some calcium or some ground up oyster shells. I mean, you can kind of add some of your own amendments. You know, you can add a few little trace elements here and there, and if you grow it well and protect it and grow it probably undercover, you probably get a very good product. So the thing is to, you know, kind of look at what you need. First of all, do your soil test to find out what's in your soil and what your soil is lacking. And then probably look at a way to amend that either with amendments that you put into the soil, or you can amend your compost and mix the amendment into the compost, and then add that directly to the bed or plot. So unlike home compost, which comes from a mix of kitchen scraps, garden waste, grass clippings, and leaves, commercial compost is often based around a single material, such as manure. A single ingredient doesn't typically compost properly unless other materials are added to it, and because it takes time and money to buy the materials and mix them in your commercial compost makers, they don't always do this. So that's one of the things. They want a quick product. They want a quick product that they can sell, something that looks like compost, and so it's a way they do it and way they make money. But sometimes like I said, you can get lucky and get a good product. So this is a little picture I saw of different types of compost. So there's many different types of compost. It's difficult to really mention all of these right now, but there's manure-based compost, there's grass-based compost, there's leaf-based compost. So you have 4 examples of compost here: number 1, number 2, and number 3, number 4. So just take a close look at those, and I'm going to ask you which ones that you might buy if you had the choice. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. We'll take a minute and look at it and make a choice. Okay, so we're going to take a look at these and remember which one you picked, and we'll get back to that, and I'll tell you about those later. So if we, the number 1 was a little bit too clumpy, and the number 2 was a little bit too pale, and the third one was kind of woodsy, and the fourth one would have been the winner because it was kind of rich, dark brown in color and crumbly, and it seemed like it had very good quality. So for me, that would have been number 4 would have been the pick to probably be the best thing for your garden. So I'm going to talk about the testing method of composting. So there are many different ways that people test compost. They send it to a laboratory, and there's quite a few different tests they do on it. It's a good thing if they can test it, but I might tell you a little secret at the end of this where we can tell you, how you can probably, test your own. So again, this study that they did it up in Woods End Laboratory. It's world renowned for compost testing and compost, technology. But it's Dr. Will Brinton, and it's up in Maine. And you can go online and look up a lot of stuff that he's done, and he is probably one of the foremost experts on compost and compost testing. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things when they tested these bags of compost in this compost study. I think they took about 30 to 40 bags, and they tested them out, and I'm going to let you in on some of the kind of results, the conclusions they came up with some of the tests. So first of all, in testing, they test for compost. One of the most important things in compost is organic matter content, and that's a key thing in all compost, and that's a very valuable thing as far as crop production is concerned. So the organic matter should be 30 to 60%. So they say that if the organic matter level is over 60%, then compost isn't yet mature, and it could temporarily inhibit plant growth when mixed into the soil. Although it could still be used safely as a surface mulch, if the level of organic matter is too low, then the compost simply won't improve the soil as well as a better quality product would. Organic matter is the essence of compost. They said Dr. Brinton also said that it is the energy source that feeds the soil microorganisms and regulates the steady release of plant nutrients. It also creates the glue that improves soil texture, and it increases the soil's ability to hold moisture. So out of the 16 of the probably 30 bags or samples that they tested, 16 out of the 30 composts were too old or had been diluted with soil, resulting in organic matter content less than 30%. Although using them wouldn't harm your soil, they were definitely not good to buy. Only a third of our samples fell within the preferred range of 30 to 60% organic matter. 4 products contained levels over 60%, indicating that they were not probably fully composted. Next thing they looked at was nitrogen content. So we know, I've talked about some of the other workshops before, that nitrogen is very important. It is one of the things that's key in the photosynthesis process of plants and plant leaves and all that, and it's what makes the plants green. So they said the nitrogen content may vary from 0.5 to 2% or more. Should be indicated on the label above 1%. So one of the things, the nitrogen is the nutrient that demands the most attention because it's the most likely to be in short supply of in your garden, because it's also the nutrient most likely to cause pollution problems if it's overapplied. The nitrogen content should be a key factor in determining appropriate application rates of compost. What their testing concluded is that only 1/3 of the bag compost listed the nitrogen content on their labels. But Dr. Britton's lab revealed that the products were not using nitrogen content to set their recommended application rates. The rates provided on the bags were often too high. No labels made a distinction between annual rates and higher one-time rates for new beds. pH, another very important, critically important thing, because we talked about this in some of the workshops. The pH is the driving force of nutrients moving in and out of the soil complex into the plant. So sometimes they'll move and sometimes they'll just sit if they don't get the right pH. So a pH range should be a neutral range between 6.5 and 7.5. So pH is a measure of acidity and alkalinity represented by a number on a scale in which 1 is very acidic, 7 is neutral, and 4 is extremely alkaline. For optimum plant growth, you want to maintain a nearly neutral pH in your garden. Regular applications of good quality compost help maintain neutral soil pH. It's a buffer. But you should avoid using overly acidic compost on soils that are already naturally acidic, and avoid high pH products on already alkaline soils. If you don't know your soil's pH, have it tested. So one of the things they found out when testing these composts, they said about half of the samples fell within the 6.5 to 7.5 range. 9 were too high, as alkaline as 8.3, and 4 were too low, as acidic as 4.5. If you think a difference in pH is just 1 point or so, it probably doesn't matter that much. Think again. The pH scale is logarithmic, which means that for each 1 point change, the alkalinity or acidity increases or decreases by 10 times. Carbonate levels should be indicated when high. So using an overly acidic compost won't usually do any long-term damage to your soil, but using one that's too alkaline might. High pH composts often contain carbonates, usually in the form of lime, calcium carbonate. If you have a naturally alkaline soil, most common in dry regions, or if your soil is acidic and you already apply lime to reduce the acidity. Dr. Britton's lab warned that you should avoid using a high pH compost. Once the soil contains too much carbonate, other nutrients such as potassium and zinc will become unavailable. And there's no easy way to bring the soil back into balance. So that's the critical thing about soil sometimes, because you can do these little things here and there and you can put them terribly out of balance, and sometimes you really can't get them back into balance because you can't extract those nutrients or these amendments that you put in. So out of the testing, what they did, they found out that 30% of the compost had high carbonate levels, making them poor choices for use on alkaline or recently limed soil. And not a single compost producer had informed information about carbonate levels on its label. That's a critical point right there. Okay, moving on to the last thing, the criteria they checked out was salinity. So salinity should not exceed 5 moles per centimeter. So a mole is a unit used to measure salt conductivity. It's electrical kind of current conductivity, I would say, way to measure that. So as organic matter decomposes, minerals are slowly converted to salts that dissolve in water and become available for plant roots to absorb. If compost production is not managed properly, or if a large amount of chicken manure is used, salts can sometimes accumulate to a level high enough to injure your plants, especially seedlings. Low salinity is particularly important in dry regions where soils are already naturally high in salts because there isn't enough rainfall to release the salts down into the subsoil. You should also choose a low salt compost for heavy applications before direct seeding and for container mixes. So they're testing, what they found out is that 25% of the samples exceeded 5 moles per centimeter standard, and none of the compost products were evaluated listed the salinity levels on the label. So labeling is an issue sometimes. So what the test really revealed, they talked about 3 things: texture, color, moisture, and smell. So we'll talk about each of those quickly. Texture, 1 out of every of the 4 of the 30 brands they inspected contained compost that was too sticky and clumping. That is, would have been impossible to spread in the garden. So several others were obviously too woody and not fully composted. Texture. Color. The color of all the brands was similar while the composts were moist, but when they dried them out for a few days, 3 of the brands were too light in color to be good quality compost. So that means they had quite a bit of soil mixed into them. Moisture. All of the sticky compost, 1 out of every 4 were just too wet. Most others were appropriately moist. Only 1 product had a low moisture content, and it was labeled as chicken manure fertilizer. Dry composted will not burn. Dry composted will not burn. We suspected a problem because of the product's strong odor, and sure enough, they confirmed that chicken manure was not fully composted. So sometimes you can get these manure-based compost, and if people are really trying to rush and make a product and put it on the market and get paid for it, they don't even compost the product to its full extent, so that is a problem. So smell. They found out that several brands that smell sour or reeked of ammonia, and indicating poor quality, immature products. And they said only 1 of the bags they had tested had a desired earthy, woodsy smell when they first opened it, but several more developed the earthy odor after they had been exposed to air for a few days. So I mentioned that before, is that sometimes these organisms that really produce this earthy smell, they get kind of the bag goes without oxygen in it, so they aren't able to do their job to give you that kind of earthy smell that you really need. And so sometimes you have to open the bag up, put the compost out, and smell it. And after a day or 2, when the organisms start working and breathing, then you can smell the end result of what your product is. So the question is, can you do a quick home test? The answer to that is yes and no. You can't do a thorough test like they do in the laboratory because you probably don't have the equipment to do it. You might have a pH meter, but some of the other things that you need to do a thorough test, you can't really do it. So, but there are some things you can do. One of the things that we know is that as compost ages, it gets heavier, it gets denser as it ages, and then the organic matter varies when it gets a little bit older. So if you want to do a self-test compost, testing your compost at home, here's a quick kind of short thing that you can do, and it can can't tell you everything, but it can tell you one thing or a few things that are important. So what you want to do is spread a shovel full of compost indoors or on a layer of newspaper. Step 2 would be to let it air dry for about a week. Step 3 would be then to measure out exactly 1 pint That would be 2 cups of the dried compost and weigh it. You might have a scale at home, or you might not. Now, if it weighs from 8 to 12 ounces, then it contains the desired level of 30 to 60% organic matter. That's what you're really looking for, your compost at least 30 to 60% organic matter. If it weighs less than 8 ounces, the compost is probably immature. And if it weighs more than 12 ounces, it's too old or has been diluted with soil. So these things, you can do some kind of simple testing like that definitely from the product if you buy compost in bags, and kind of give you a little indication of what you can use and what you can buy. I don't have any recommendations for bags, different types of products, but if you do some research online, you can probably get some products, recommendations and save you some money and time and help you to be a compost connoisseur, and then you can be truly understanding and knowledgeable about the good, the bad, and the ugly news you need to know about buying compost or making compost. This has been M. Chizaji Axum, Director of Urban Ag and Gardening Education. Have a great day. Have a good growing day. Take care.